Okay, so I'm the last one standing between you and lunch. Hope you bear with me. Last presentation of the conference. So the idea is actually a broader one, and we have been doing several studies on that. And if I have enough time, I'll show you two of them actually today. And the basic idea is that a decision about giving, about altruistic decisions or about cooperative decisions, is always a struggle between an impulse, and we usually assume that the impulse is to be selfish, and some better judgment where you have to exert some willpower that you behave according to a social norm, to be whatever altruistic, to give, to cooperate with others. Actually. That's the basic idea behind all these things. And we haven't nailed it down, I think, but you'll see that I guess we make some progress on how we can view that decision and how the data look like. Actually. The first paper is together with Peter Martinson, who presented in the last session, Christian Mürset and Conny Wolbrandt from the University of Gothenburg, and Christian is at St. Andrews University. So as I said, the basic idea is this self-control idea, and it's always the tension between a better judgment, and in our case, it's a social norm. You want to follow the social norm. That's the better judgment, and temptation, actually. And it has been used a lot, of course, in individual decision-making problems, when it's about whatever, exercising, eating healthy, and so on. It has not been used that much in terms of decision-making in social contexts. And we actually apply it to a social context, and there are some studies around, some newer studies that do the same, actually. We have a model. I'm not going to talk too much about the model in the interest of time, but it's very straightforward and very clear what it says. I mean, of course, it's dependent on the assumptions, and we will run an experiment in a laboratory. That's the first thing to do, as Glenn said. Actually. Okay. There is some literature. So psychologists and economists that have thought about this kind of dual self problems, the self-control problems. They have actually mentioned sometimes interactive decision-making problems. So for instance, O'Donoghue and Lowenstein in their paper, they say that selfish urges may often conflict with the colder, more abstract preferences for altruism. So I don't know whether altruism is colder or more abstract. It could be also the other way around, so it's a bit unclear. It's an empirical question. If you accept that self-control is somehow related to time preferences, to patience, impatience, then there is some literature out there that shows that these discount rates in time preferences, being patient, is related to being cooperative in a public goods provision problem, actually. So if you're more impatient, you're more likely to be selfish. That's what most of the literature shows. Not all. I mean, this is always, I have to be careful to say that. Okay, let's just skip that. In general, there's very little evidence. There's some evidence in bargaining, some recent evidence, which is also, of course, interactive decision-making. It's not clear, as I said, whether self-control and impatience is the same. So again, you have to be careful here. And even what is the better judgment? So there are several papers actually that turn the question around, and I think that's important also for charities. Sometimes it's the better judgment to follow the social norm. It could also be the other way around. So if I'm approached by a beggar on the street, it would be probably the better judgment not to give there. My impulse is probably to give because I can't avoid giving, but it would be better judgment to go home and donate money to a respectable charity, actually. Okay? So it could be also turned around in specific situations. In the situation that we are using in the laboratory, it's probably pretty clear because it's abstract, so the better judgment is probably following the norm, but it doesn't have to be the case in all situations that you're facing in that respect. Okay, the model is very straightforward, so I just skip it and I'll tell you what we get actually from the theory, and the theory is made up in a way that we get that, so it's not too surprising. So we actually have a two-stage decision problem, and the first stage in our model is where you identify this conflict, this norm conflict, and the model says if you identify this conflict, then increasing willpower leads to an increase in contributions. Okay, so that's the straightforward hypothesis. And we have a second proposition that has to do with risk attitudes, but risk attitudes are not perfectly measured in our experiment, so I don't want to make too much out of it because we don't have lotteries there. We just have a utility function in the model, and that can be, of course, concave, and then you get this picture. So what are we doing in the experiment? It's a standard voluntary contribution mechanism public goods game, a linear one. Everybody has seen it, I guess, in many presentations here. So you have a certain endowment of 20 tokens here. You can contribute to the public account. The amount is collected, and it's multiplied by, in our case, 1.6 in groups of 4, and then divided equally among the group members. And the setup is, of course, standard. That means that it's individually rational not to contribute here because the MPCR is smaller than 1, but it's collectively rational to contribute because everybody's better off if everybody contributes everything. Actually, okay? What we are doing actually is we're using a specific design here that was developed by Fischbacher, Fehr, and Falk, if I remember correctly. And they actually asked not only for an unconditional contribution, unconditional of what others do in your group, they also elicit a conditional contribution. So you can actually say, okay, if others contribute that and that, I contribute that and that. Okay? And I'll show you in a second how it's incentivized. Both of these are incentivized. Many of you know how it's done. Actually, we elicit expectations with linear incentives, and everything is on the computer, so the standard laboratory setup. So that's, you can't read it, but it's probably easy to see the general picture, the pattern. This is the unconditional contribution. You just ask how much you want to contribute to the public account, actually. Okay, that's the framing in the instructions. And then you're asked how much you want to contribute, given that you knew that the average contributions of the others in your group is 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and so on, going up to 20, actually, okay? And to incentivize both decisions, you have a 3 out of 4 chance that this will be your relevant decision, and a 1 out of 4 chance within the groups of 4 that this will be the relevant decision. And for the 3 that have this as the relevant decision, you can calculate the average, and then the respective average here actually determines the decision of the 4th member of the group. Okay, so that's the general setup that is used to incentivize both decisions. Okay, and having the entire contribution scheduler table allows you to learn a bit more about different types of players. Many of you know, of course, how this is. Then we elicit risk attitudes, not so important here. We're coming to the most important part. What we're doing here in this first study, actually, we're using a psychological questionnaire to address self-control. And of course, I mean, this is of course only correlations. We cannot make any causal inference. I'm coming back to that in the second study that I'm showing you. We'll try to address that problem. But this was the first thing to do, actually. And there are several things. There are questionnaires or batteries of questionnaires on impulsivity. We use one is used quite often, as far as I know, in social psychology or in psychology. That's the so-called Rosenbaum self-control schedule, actually. Okay, it's abbreviated by RSS, and it has been shown to be related and correlated with a lot of different behavioral tasks that are associated with self-control. So, for instance, if you have a higher Rosenbaum self-control schedule measure, it's a set of, I think, 36 questions. I think I have 2 or 3 examples of them. You're more likely to resisting pain. You are more likely, or you're better able to cope with stress. You're better able to cope with mental disability. You're better able to cope with seasickness. You prefer, I don't know who did this study, actually. Might have been a funny study, actually. I don't know. Is it a major factor? Okay, good, thanks. Saving, overspending, and so on, actually. So it seems to be related at least to your self-control abilities, actually. And of course, when I talk about self-control or willpower, I mean, of course, the same, actually. So the idea is that people have different levels of willpower, different costs to exert willpower, and the opposite of that is self-control. Okay. Oops. So, we actually assume that this is a trait. You don't have to, but psychologists tell us, okay, self-control is a trait. There is literature that shows that. I mean, many of you know the famous study by Michel and co-authors, so the famous studies where they have the cookie. I mean, many of us actually show it, I think, in class. The cookies or the marshmallows of the 4-year-olds, and whether you wait for a second one predicts later outcomes in life. And to that extent, you could assume that, or you could actually conclude that this is really a trait and not something that is very strongly context dependent. But in the end, it doesn't matter too much for our thing. So these are 3 questions of this schedule. When I do a boring job, I think about the less boring part of the job and the reward that I will receive once I'm finished. And so you go through all these questions, and you can strongly agree to strongly disagree, and some of them are turned around not to make it too easy, and then you can have a consistency measure and so on. So it's standard way to use questions. This is the most difficult part of the study. It is not essential, but the results depend a bit on that. So in our model, we have this conflict identification. And of course, if there's enough observations, it shouldn't matter too much. But we get some of the results not significant if you don't use that. So the idea is, if you don't recognize that there is a conflict, a norm conflict, then there shouldn't be a problem for you, and then you shouldn't, your behavior shouldn't depend on self-control. So what we do is actually we ask them in the end of the experiment to what extent you experience conflict when deciding how much to contribute. Okay? And we were very abstract about it, so we didn't tell them what kind of conflict. We actually used the German term, probably important to say that it's called Zwiespalt. The German speakers know that this means dilemma actually. So it was pretty clear that that's about the dilemma between contributing and not contributing, but we didn't want to be too suggestive, of course. And we asked them on a scale from 0 to 100. Okay? Good. So the average results are the same as you would expect, and so you don't have to look at the details of the regression table. We ran lots of regressions, and what we get in all of these regressions is two things actually. First, let me tell you that the regressions, it doesn't matter whether you take all S, it doesn't matter whether you take top it doesn't matter whether you actually split the regressions with regard to conflict identification or use a dummy variable for it. So what we do here is actually these are the regressions where for people that indicated that they felt conflicted when they took a decision. And what we get actually is two main results. First of all, that's the standard result in literature. The more others give, that's the others variable, the more others give, the more likely you're giving actually, okay? Or the more you give actually. Okay? And this is the second result, the Rosenbaum self-control schedule, and it shows you that the more self-control you have, controlling for what others give actually, the more likely or the more you give actually as well. So this is exactly in line with our prediction. Yeah. Spiking is zero conflict identification or contributions. About 20%, I guess, something around that. So yeah. So if you do top it, I mean, we get the same result. But which one? Hurdle, yeah, okay, yeah, I agree. We don't have enough power. I agree, hurdle is the correct one. It shouldn't matter, I guess. I'm pretty sure, given what I've seen from data, it shouldn't matter. If you take those who didn't identify conflicts, you get still the relationship between what others contribute and what they contribute, but there is no effect of self-control. So obviously, they don't draw on their self-control abilities, or they don't have to, because there is no self-control conflict, at least in their eyes. Again, I have to say, ex post, we asked ex post, so you could say, okay, it's an ex post justification of what you did. Actually. So that's we can't exclude that. Okay, so we get conditional contributions that are positively correlated with self-control for individuals who have experienced conflict, and we get also an effect for risk, but it's very weak, so I don't tell you much about it. There are some other results, but in the interest of time, I just skip them. What you also see, that's more interesting actually. So we get this distribution of types, and many of you know, of course, I don't have to repeat too much. The free riders are those who contribute zero regardless of what others are contributing actually. Conditional cooperators are those who increase their contribution if others also increase their contributions. Okay, so they have a positive reciprocity or expected reciprocity parameter. And then we have these hump-shaped contributors. That these are people that increase their contributions up to a certain point of others' contributions. And if others contribute a lot, then they decrease it again. And it's a bit of a weird pattern, but it's a very consistent pattern. And we see these are probably people who think, okay, if others contribute a lot, I don't have to, so I can free ride on them. And if they don't contribute a lot, I'm required also to contribute. And we get a distribution of these types that is very much in line with previous experiments. So there's about 20% free riders in the population, about 50 to 60% conditional cooperators. That's almost always the case, and then about 10 to 20% of hump-shaped and other patterns that you cannot actually classify easily. And what you see is actually, you don't see it, but if you run tests, those types are completely the same statistically in all observable characteristics. So they have the same self-control abilities, they have the same risk attitudes. The only thing that matters is the free riders they are much less likely to identify conflicts. Again, you could say, okay, ex post, that's justification of what they did, but this is the only real difference between the free riders and the conditional cooperators. So they're much less likely to identify the conflict. For them, it seems that it doesn't matter. They don't see it as a self-control problem. Okay, and you can do that with the unconditional contributions, and we get the same result for unconditional contributions, but I don't go into details there. Okay? So one of the things that you, as an experimentalist, might not like about the paper is that we use only correlations. There is no direct influence or direct treatment on your self-control abilities. And the second paper with Nadia, a PhD student in Munich, where we actually tried to tackle that problem. And we ran into some problems. I'll tell you what we did actually. Okay. So we try to exogenously vary your willpower or self-control abilities. Okay? And there are lots of different ways actually. Okay, that's the problem. I mean, if you start to look at it, yeah, beer. We didn't think about that one, but it's a good one actually. Munich students are pretty much used to beer, so it's not too easy actually to address their self-control abilities with beer. You have to have a lot of beer actually. Anyway, so you can actually, so one of the things that is used very often in literature is cognitive load, ego depletion, stress. I mean, there are lots of different methods. We use something that has been used very lately a lot, also in economic experiments, and that's the Stroop task. Many of you might have seen that before. Actually. So what we do is actually, we have the same experiment as I showed you before, or almost the same, a bit different, but there is a Stroop task in the beginning of the experiment. And the Stroop task comes in two different versions. So I'll tell you a bit about the Stroop task, and then I'll tell you about the different versions. Okay? And I'll just skip the literature here again. There's a bit of it. That's the Stroop task, actually, and that's how we presented it to subjects. So you see a word that is a color, and the letters are written in a specific color. And what you have to do actually here is select here. You don't see it. There are 6 panels to select 6 different colors, and you have to select not the name of the color, but the color in which these letters are written. So this would be blue here. Okay, and this is the same problem, but here the color matches the word, so it would be red. It's easy actually. Okay, so this is what we call the real Stroop task, and this is what we call the placebo Stroop task. And what we did, not to make it, I mean, too obvious, I think we had, so they had to solve it for 5 minutes. I tell you, it looks easy. If you do it for 5 minutes, it's really exhausting. It's really, really difficult. And what we did actually, we mixed, I think, in the placebo Stroop task, we mixed, I think, 2 or 3 difficult ones, and in the real Stroop task, we mixed in a few easy ones actually to make it a bit more mixed. But this is what they do. They do it for 5 minutes before the start of the experiment. Actually, they get the instructions of the public goods game before the Stroop task. Then they go through a Stroop task for 5 minutes, and then we ask them for contributions. Okay? So what did we do actually? The Stroop task, yeah, that's a good point. I just wanted to mention that. The Stroop task was incentivized by a fixed payment. So we didn't want to, of course, give them different, I mean, this one, the real Stroop task, is much more complicated than the placebo one. So you would have 2 different groups with different earnings if you pay them per solved problem. We didn't want to do that. So actually we gave them 4 euros fixed for the 5 minutes. That's a pretty nice payment. And we told them, you get 4 euros, and your task is to answer as many of these questions as possible. Okay? And they answered about whatever 75 in the difficult Stroop version and 86 in the placebo one. They were, I think, 1 second or 2 seconds between each screen, so that's pretty good. They did pretty well. They make a bit more mistakes here, but not very many mistakes than here. And they also, thanks a lot, almost there. What you also see is actually, that's important, that they feel much more stressed than those actually. So we asked them ex post, did you feel stressed? How did you feel about it? So they feel much more stressed. So the idea is that the Stroop task actually brings down, depletes your abilities to exert self-control, okay? And then reduces contributions to the public good. And I only show you 2 things, or 1 thing actually, because I'm running out of time. This is now the distribution of different types according to this contribution tables. Let's forget about others and Hum-shape. Let's concentrate on conditional cooperators and free riders. You've seen the green bars beforehand. That was the study that I showed you beforehand. The blue bars are now the Stroop task participants, and the red bars are the placebo Stroop task participants. And what you see is actually the number of conditional cooperators after the Stroop task becomes smaller, the number of the free riders increase, and it's the opposite for the placebo Stroop task. And it's significant. So it seems to go in the right direction, okay? So that looks very nice. One note of caution, the effect on the unconditional contribution, we have also the unconditional contribution, is not significant on conventional levels. So it depends a bit on how you see it. You have also beliefs. If you take beliefs into account, you get a 10%, you get a 10% significance. So it's not right there. So we get in the right direction. It seems that self-control influences cooperative behavior. It does in terms of the types. It does only weakly significantly so in terms of the unconditional contributions. Okay? So one explanation could be that the unconditional contribution was already set before they started the Stroop task. They get the instructions, they read the instructions, they answer the questions, and then they do the Stroop task. So it might be the case that the unconditional contribution was already set. Everybody decided, many people decided about it. Whereas filling in the table is of course something you probably not do beforehand. You think of it when you really do it, and here they are depleted. So that's one of the interpretations that you can make. Okay, let me, in the interest of time, skip that here and summarize quickly. So we have this model that relates contribution behavior in a public good to self-control. We get a correlation in the first study when we use this Rosenbaum self-control schedule. And when we exogenously vary the self-control abilities with one option that you can choose, there are different ones of course, then it seems to be the case that we also get an effect in that direction. It's significant in the conditional contributions. It's not significant on conventional levels in the unconditional contributions. So we need probably a bit more work to nail it down, and there are different ways to proceed. We might actually go for another ego depletion task because there are different ego depletion tasks. So I think it's everything taken together points in the direction of a relationship between self-control abilities and cooperation. Okay, thanks a lot. Please. That's something, yeah? Or whatever. I mean, yeah, something like that, yeah. After lunch, yeah, that's the point actually. Also, deprivation of water or food actually has similar effects. I mean, we haven't used it. Other groups have used it in different experiments, not about cooperation, but yeah, the advice will be try to avoid these kind of situations actually. Yeah, correct. Felix, yeah. Yeah, you're talking about the RAND paper. Yeah, this is the opposite actually. I completely agree. I didn't mention it because I didn't have enough time. So there's a paper that shows that if you think longer when you decide about an altruistic choice, then you're more likely to become selfish. So the idea is actually that it's an impulse or whatever. We are hardwired in a way that we are cooperative, but we become selfish when we think about it, when we deliberate. They have lots of experiments there. But it's of course correlation because it's time, so there's no time pressure there. So I agree with you. I'm not sure that I believe in this result because all what I know from development psychology, it's the other way around. I mean, we are selfish as kids. I mean, you know better than I. And then we learn to be a social animal. And so I think it's a weird result. Anyway, it's there. It's significant. It's some certain extent. It's also convincing. So I think we need more research to resolve this inconclusiveness. Yeah. Yeah, because our story here with self-control is saying actually you have to exert self-control. Yeah, it's not directly, I mean, it's not directly inconclusive. Actually, we also have decision times here. So we can actually try to replicate the RAND result. So what they do is actually take decision time as a measure for self-control, if you wish, actually. And we don't find any significant direction. So people who think longer, they're not more selfish or less selfish. We don't get any significant direction. And that's probably the case because decision time is not a perfect measure, because some people would think of different things, some people would be slower, and I mean, there's lots of noise there. So, yeah. Sorry. Oh, sorry. Oh, sorry. I mean, I was not there. I came late yesterday. I'm very sorry. Yeah. Okay. 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 Oh, I'm glad to hear that. Perfect. Thanks. Thanks a lot.